The Pies have got to keep the wheels ticking over and collect 4 points against a dogged Carlton team that were extremely disappointing defensively against Geelong. First up, I've just heard some massive injury news, so stick around to the end where we talk about some team selections. But let's firstly get into the last time Carlton and Collingwood met towards the back end of last season, where Collingwood lost 76 to 93. So we lose by 17 points despite having the same amount of scoring shots against Carlton, where we were rather disappointing. It was within a period where Carlton were sort of on this crazy resurgence where they were 5-1-8 towards the latter end of the season, and they went on a massive winning run to surge their way into a prelim final that year, while Collingwood were conversely in a different predicament where they had pretty much sealed up the top 4 hopes and were locked in for a home final, and sort of naturally, psychologically took the foot off the pedal a little bit. And that's like an intangible that we're not really going to be able to point out and say, yeah, these are the stats that suggest, yes, this is a psychological switching off of the mind. It's just what happens. That's the way sport works when you get complacent in these situations. So two teams that were in very different worlds at that point, and maybe that played a little bit to that result. It was an odd encounter considering that 6 of the 7 highest rated players for that game were Collingwood. Number 1 being Curnow, and we'll talk a bit more about him a bit later. We kicked 6 against Darcy Moore that game, and Curnow managed to do this in the absence of Harry Mackay for that game in particular. And that was another period of time for Carlton where they were actually performing much better with just Curnow in the forward line versus having Mackay in there, and they really took full advantage of that situation in that specific matchup. Probably still an issue for them, the fact that they're both in their forward line right now, and we'll talk more to that in just a moment. And despite having the same amount of scoring shots, having 6 of the 7 highest rated players for the game, in the end, our battle in the contest was nowhere near good enough. I think we were plus 30 in Carlton's favour for contested positions. So they won that stat by 30 plus, which is astronomical. That's something Collingwood's been able to do twice within the space of 12 months against Port Adelaide. So you can imagine what type of game transpires when you lose that stat by that much. Similar to the game against Essendon, we actually lost the clearance count by more than 10 clearances against Carlton in this matchup. So one of those things where we're probably going to have to knuckle down on our clearance work and our contested possession battle for the upcoming game this Friday. In contrast, regarding those ratings, our bottom 6 performers for that game were basically our starting 6 for our forward line, and champion data does tend to be quite harshly rated against missed scoring shots for forwards, so that probably talks to why that was the case. And from what I looked into, there were 4 forwards who had 9 behinds between them, so that probably talks to why the ratings were so low for our forwards in that game. Ironically, Jeremy Howe did swing forward in that 4th quarter and kicked 3 goals in quick succession, which did soften that lead, and it could have been a little bit worse than what it ended up being. But it's always nice to have that trick up your sleeve with Jeremy Howe, who could swing forward. And I think there is an opportunity there at some point throughout the season to really get Howe into that forward line and have an impact that he has had in recent times. Last thing on that game, Josh Dacos was absolutely massive. He had 27 disposals, 6 intercept possessions, a goal and 2 goal assists. So the question always poses, how do Collingwood win this game against Carlton? Well, what we've seen in the last 2 weeks, which we cannot afford to see this week, is our slow starts in the game against great opposition in Port Adelaide and Essendon. We were lucky enough to get the 4 points against Port Adelaide, and we were fortunate to get the 2 points against Essendon. So I think on the top of Collingwood's priority wish list for the game would be to start strong in the clearances, the contested possession battles as well, and really just drive our game from there. The other thing was we actually gave away too many easy free kicks, particularly early on. I think we gave away 22 for the game against Essendon, so we cannot afford to do that again. So Carlton against Geelong were really exposed by Geelong's contingency of small forwards. I think we had Tyson Stengel, Brian Myers, who was outstanding, Bradley Close, Dempsey, and even Jeremy Cameron runs like a small forward up and down the ground for the duration of the entire match, which made it extremely difficult for Carlton's two-way runners to keep up with. Thankfully, Collingwood have an elite group of small forwards that can emulate or are emulating what Geelong are able to do to a slightly lesser degree, Bobby, Billy, Bo and Lockie. So that will be on full watch on Friday night to see how our forwards can pressure and get easy goals at the back if possible, and if our ball movement permits that initially. So contest, ball movement, and then get running, get out the back. You would have seen in my recent video analysis against Essendon that we are just losing little moments in defence, whether it's Billy Frampton, Darcy Moore, John Noble. These are the differences between being a top 4 defensive side and a bottom 4 defensive side. And I think right now we are, well, at least last year, we were top 4 in least points conceded. This year, we are top 4 for the most points conceded, which clearly our slow start and the absence of Murphy is hurting us. So hopefully to see some more decision making and more players fulfill the role that Murphy has left a hole in. Fortunately for Collingwood, Carlton share that similar unwanted stat of being in top 4 for the most points conceded this year. The inability to defend fast ball movement is a watch this space Friday night. Expect a high scoring game. Carlton, while they do concede a lot, they are also top 3 for points scored, and Collingwood aren't quite there just yet for points scored this season. So Carlton definitely have a little bit more firepower. They have vulnerabilities in the defense, and they're a bit obvious going and predictable going forward. So that's the hand we're being dealt with in this Friday night matchup. In saying all that, Carlton have had a reasonably kind fixture relative to where obviously Collingwood have had to travel and who they've had to play against. Carlton have already played against Richmond, North Melbourne, Adelaide and Fremantle, and they are all either 8th position or below. I think Fremantle were 8th position and everyone else is below that position right now. So definitely Collingwood facing up against the more tougher opposition. However, Carlton did comprehensively beat GWS, but they were convincingly beaten by Geelong. Putting the clamps on Carlton's elite contested marking ability is going to be a very high priority. Putting the clamps on Carlton's superior aerial contested marking is going to be a massive emphasis for Collingwood, particularly in our defensive half when coming up against the likes of Curnow and Mackay. They're both top 5 in the league for contested marks. I think they're both averaging over 3 contested marks a game. So it's important that we don't get beaten by what we know, and really, more importantly, don't get beaten by the entirety of what the AFL know about Carlton is. They heavily target Curnow and Mackay going forward. So quell those blokes and we'll go a long way into winning this game and being competitive. Carlton are currently the #1 team for scores from stoppages, and that's with many thanks to players like Cripps, Walsh, Pittonet. So it's going to be a big job for our midfielders, whoever that is that's involved in the game, to put a blanket over those players. All 3 of them are top 10 in contested possessions for the league, which is massive. So we know where the battle will be won and lost in this game. It's going to be from the initial contest, the first contest at every play. However, I will note Carlton are also conceding the 3rd most from scores from stoppages in their games, and that's 3rd behind North, who have been absolutely terrible this year, and West Coast, who have been shown to display really good developing signs, but early in the year they were relatively uncompetitive. Both teams right now are top 3 in the league for shots per inside 50, both going at a clip of above 50%. Meaning more than 50% of the time they're going inside 50, they're registering a scoring shot, whether that be a goal or a behind. And while the Pies haven't quite found their defensive half transition just yet, barring the Essendon game where we showed some really good signs, particularly from kick-ins, I think we kicked 3 goals from that stat alone. The leading club in goals from kick-ins this year averaged less than a goal, so three goals in a game is unbelievable. We've developed a new brand of footy to add to the tricks up our sleeves in scores from turnovers. We're 4th in the league for that stat right now, which it suggests that Fly has been proactive and is not being naive to the point that he would know that the rest of the league is going to try to catch up on this whole defensive half transition evolution in our game. And clubs are getting better at finding ways to clog up the corridor and force you to go wide. So clearly there's been an emphasis from Fly to improve and further mould this forward half game that we're now developing. People aren't too crash hot on the acquisition of Lockie Schultz just yet, but I guarantee you, while his stats may not suggest it, he is playing a big role in those forward half turnovers. So all in all, while we were 1st in defensive half transition last year in the league, we're currently scoring 10 points less from that area and scoring 1 more goal in turnovers per game right now. Let's talk about the player focus points now. And the first matchups I want to talk about is in the defensive area. I think Braden Maynard and or Darcy Moore will play on Curnow for the most part of the game. If Darcy Moore decides to play loose and play on the third key tall, who will be Tom De Koning or Mark Pittonet at given times throughout the game, I think that will allow Darcy to play loose, but Bruzzy will have to play on Curnow in lieu of someone like Jeremy Howe. I don't think Jeremy Howe is strong enough in the contested realm to stick with Curnow. I think Curnow, obviously being like I said, a top 5 contested mark player in the league, Jeremy Howe's not exactly known for his one-on-one prowess in the contest. So probably avoid that matchup. Bruzzy, who's a bull, get him on him. And with regards to Mackay, I think Billy Frampton, while probably giving away a little bit in speed off the mark, I think that's a pretty good matchup like for like given their height. Usually you can pencil in the matchup between Paddy Cripps and Scott Pendlebury, and a break even would be good enough for this case considering Patrick Cripps is at an all-time level right now when it comes to his game. He's the 3rd highest rated player in the competition right now behind Isaac Heaney and Matt Rowell. So it speaks to the level he's playing at for Carlton in 2024. The other shoe-in matchup will probably be Nick Dacos and Sam Walsh when Nick Dacos decides to feature in the middle, depending what the game plan is as well. So that's all pending. Nick Dacos is the 6th highest rated player in the league, only to be one behind Sam Walsh, who is number 5. Obviously, both these players are workhorses and they're fiends for the ball, and they'll run any of their opposition into the ground if they weren't facing each other. I think this one will be a real war of attrition when it comes to the running capacity. As I mentioned earlier, Carlton have been leaking goals this year, particularly against Geelong. They struggled against the small forwards. Even Jeremy Cameron was running like a man possessed on the wing, up and down, and kicking goals himself. But between Brian Myers, Zach Tui and Henry, they kicked 8 goals between each other, and Jeremy Cameron adding 5 to that tally. And I say Jeremy Cameron because, like I said, while he is, I guess, considered a tall forward, he runs like a small forward. So it shows that players like Brody Myercheck and our small forwards can really take advantage of the poor two-way running that's been put on display for Carlton so far this year. The last matchup that we need to earmark is Pittonet versus Mason Cox and Darcy Cameron. And there's been a lot of vitriol and I guess criticism that's been swung Pittonet's way in recent years, but what he's doing right now has never been seen before in his career. He's the 3rd highest rated ruckman behind, I think that would be Max Gawn and Tristan Xerri. He's 2nd in contested possessions between the ruckman and 1st for clearances, averaging 8 per game. So we're going to need to be switched on from the get-go. Mark Pittonet was actually on fire against Geelong early in the game when it came to the clearances realm, so we need to ensure that we nullify that aspect of his game and bring it back down to earth a little bit. I think Darcy Cameron, he's sort of flirting with this contention to be a top 5 ruckman for the season. I think he needs to have 1 or 2 really good games, but they need to come much sooner rather than later for him to keep up with the top performers in the league right now. As I mentioned, Max Gawn, Xerri, and Pittonet have been absolutely outstanding for the year so far. Moving into the team selection, it's the first time this year where we've sort of been facing a few injury clouds that will plague how our team runs out this Friday night against Carlton. Still Sidebottom firstly, before we get into injuries, I suspect he would either get relegated to the sub position or be rested or even played in the VFL. I'm not sure how that pans out. We're 2 days away. I haven't heard too much about it, so we'll see where it goes. He's been down on form. I think he needs to go to the VFL and just get some, rack up easy disposals, get the confidence back up and put away any doubts that you think you're getting old or you're past it now. I think there's still more for Still Sidebottom to give to the Collingwood Football Club in 2024. And at the same time, you've got to honour the form of your younger players like Harvey Harrison and Finlay McRae. We'll talk about Finlay's VFL performance. And actually, let's segue right into the 2 outs that we will need to cover this week, being Jordan De Goey and Tom Mitchell. Jordy's been carrying a groin, and I think it's no better time than right now for him to have a little bit of respite off the field and recalibrate and come back to his best that we saw in 2023. For Tom Mitchell, he's carrying a sore foot, so that just means more opportunity for the youngsters rolling through in the VFL. And who better to replace someone like De Goey or Tom Mitchell than Finlay McRae, who's been begging for and starved for a genuine opportunity to get a run at the game. He had 31 disposals, he had 1 goal, 6 clearances and 5 tackles in the VFL against Carlton in that massive game where they lost 85-97. So how do you not pick him at this point? It was interesting. I think there was 38 behinds between the Pies between the Pies and Essendon, not Carlton. Essendon last week. 38 behinds is just a monstrous amount of missed scoring opportunities. Anyways, I digress. Get Finn in, give him an opportunity. Ned Long has had another decent game, 22 disposals, 2 scoring shots, and 11 tackles. So he's absolutely spurring on the coaching panel at Collingwood to really consider him in this mid-season draft. Considering there's one vacancy right now, which is left by Nathan Murphy retiring, unfortunately, due to concussion, there's also the talk that if McStay decides a few days out before the mid-season trade window spots are closed, if he decides, nah, just put him in a long-term injury list, then we will have 2 spots available, which will almost certainly solidify an opportunity for Ned Long to get on the AFL list. But in saying that, even if there's just 1 spot available, I think he's a real smoky, I guess. He's a big-bodied midfielder. He's come along from Hawthorn, so I think there's a chance that we get him involved at AFL level either this year or at least next year. Finally, Ash Johnson found some form in the VFL. He actually started in the backline and collected some disposals. I think he finished with 20 for the game, swung into the forward line in the second half and kicked 2 goals. So I think it must have just been some smart ploy by the coaches, saying, let's get Ash Johnson, get him busy with the ball, get the confidence up, get some easy touches off the back line, and then he rolled into the forward line and kicked 2 goals and found some form, finally. I think he's got a lot of potential. He was one of the best players in the preseason, so he has that potential. I think his confidence is ultimately going to be the thing that either takes him to the level that we think he can get to or holds him back from ever getting to that level. Harry Dimatia finally represented the club at VFL level after coming back from that finger tendon issue. While he didn't set the world on fire there, he got some valuable minutes under the belt, and I don't think anyone's expecting him to burst onto the scene just yet. Just to be on the field is a bonus. On a side note, Nathan Kruger is available and will feature most likely in the VFL, so there may be an opportunity for him in the very near future in AFL. As usual, these types of games like Essendon on Anzac Day or versus your arch nemesis in Carlton will emanate a finals-like intensity. And we know Carlton have had some softish fixtures early in the season, so Collingwood maybe can probably take some confidence going into the game, knowing that we've had a harder run and we're a bit more ready-made for this sort of occasion, coming off the Anzac Day one. Both teams obviously coming into the game with injuries, a little bit short-handed. I think Carlton, they say Chera is a test on the AFL website. Jack Martin's still out. Mitch McGovern, Jack Carroll's done a groin. Sard's still 4 weeks away. So both teams are a bit short-handed, as I mentioned, but we know system will always prevail and beat whoever is on the field, irregardless of the potential. You look at games like Richmond versus Sydney, we came to a complete shock to the AFL world a few weeks ago. That's what teams are capable of if you stick to the system. You can beat anyone that's put out on the field in an individually given game. Clearly, it's unsustainable over the long course. You see Richmond are struggling to win games now, but there are occasions where you are short-handed and you can still win games if you just put 120% effort in the team system principles for that game. Anyhow, I'm looking forward to a really exciting game. I'll be doing a pre-game show and a live stream with Caleb from the Pies Eyes podcast. So if you're going to watch the game and want to watch along with us, then follow us on the stream. Thanks, guys. Bye.